I really like to give speeches. Less so spontaneous raise your glass speeches, but rather well-prepared speeches, ideally accompanied by a well-prepared presentation. Whenever there is a group project at university or a presentation required, somebody needs to give that presentation. And usually that guy is me. I enjoy doing it, and like everyone, I like to improve upon my hobbies. Over the years, I've taught myself a few things about how to prepare a good speech. So despite all the seminars and books and videos that exist on this topic already, I would like to give you my personal take on it. Whenever I prepare a speech, there are two crucial things that I really pay attention to. I call them focus and toolbox. Let's start with focus. Focus asks the question, out of the 1 billion things one could say about this topic, what are the most important ones which I want the audience to know? To achieve a strong message, you need to choose very carefully what information to include in your speech and not fall into the tempting trap of trying to include everything. Steve Jobs was the master of focusing on clear messages. Take, for example, his introduction of the iPod Nano in the year 2005. A remarkable piece of consumer tech at its time. Rather than going through every single feature, he chose one message that determined the tone for the entire presentation. It's the thinnest piece of consumer electronics in the world. That was his message. And he was using remarkably few words to communicate it. Sure, he prepared some nice slides to go along with that, but if you think about it, the slides weren't all that important. They simply reinforced whatever he was saying in that moment. The starting point of every presentation should be a speech. And every speech needs a clear focus. Only when you're very clear about what the few things are that you want the audience to know, you can make them care. If you don't know what exactly it is that you want them to remember, then they won't know either. And nothing cries "I don't care" louder than losing the train of thought of the audience. The moment I've set a tight focus for my speech, I automatically find myself talking with much better intonation and ultimately see the audience paying attention. As to the second point, the toolbox. A box full of elements which I always make sure to weave into my speech every now and then. These include quotes and facts that help underpin my credibility, real-world examples which help to make something abstract more concrete, and little jokes to lighten up the mood and keep the audience's attention. It's important to note that every funny remark I ever make in my speech is always tied to some factual piece of information, so that, in case the joke part of it isn't received as I hoped, the audience can always read the informative part instead. Never ever include a joke into your speech which has the sole purpose of being funny, unless you're a comedian. With focus and toolbox in mind, I work on the script for my speech. And writing the script goes hand in hand with practicing. Very often I read sentences out loud immediately after I wrote them down, just to see what they sound like when spoken. Most of the time, they sound rather different than what I imagined them to sound like in my head. Ultimately, I end up going over every word multiple times and create dozens of iterations of my speech in the process. The very last iteration I'm working on is the one that ends up being my speech, just like this one.